In this video, we're going to be learning about scientific theory. What is the difference between a scientific theory and a theory such as if you say, well, I have a theory about, and you're just kind of speculating. A scientific theory is actually quite a different thing. So, a scientific theory is an explanation with broad application in science, and it's something that is accepted as supported. Basically, what that means is the preponderance of evidence and many, many instances of the same thing occurring all suggest that a theory is applicable. So, what are some of the most common theories that we have in biology? Well, germ theory is one. In germ theory, it suggests that some microorganisms can cause disease. We have game theory. So when you're thinking about things like competition for mates or food or habitat, game theory is behavior that can be predicted based on certain conditions. So again, like if animals are competing, they're going to behave differently than if there's ample resources and there's no competition. Plate tectonics explain a lot in science. Why do we have species with similar characteristics that are seemingly so far removed from one another on the planet that they couldn't possibly be related, and yet genetics and morphology or body structure suggests that they actually are? Well, we know now because of plate tectonic theory that continents have drifted over time. At times, all continents were joined together, such as when we had Pangea, and now we're currently separated into the scenario where we have seven different continents. Evolution is another theory. Evolution by natural selection, specifically, is posited by Charles Darwin and Wallace. And this is just that differential survival and reproduction lead to changes in genetics of populations over time. What does that mean? Well, it means that natural selection, remember, some organisms have a competitive advantage over others because of some characteristics that they have. So let me go back to my example of competition. So if you are an elk competing with another elk and you have genes that make your antlers especially large, and you've been able to use the food and habitat resources around you to your advantage, so you're big, you get to mate with the most females. So you're going to pass on those genes for those characteristics to your offspring. Over time, larger antler sets in elk will be favored because more genes for larger antlers will be found in the population. In other words, cell theory, we talked about this one in the very first lesson that you've had this semester. Cell theory, living organisms are composed of cells. We know that all living things fundamentally come down to that basic unit called the cell. You can break them down smaller than that into like atoms and molecules and even organelles. But remember, those in and of themselves are not considered alive. Life starts at the level of the cell. So there are some conditions for a scientific theory. A scientific theory has to be consistent with pre-existing theory. So I mentioned that before. The preponderance of evidence supports that there's sort of this universal theme, and that theory has to have been experimentally verified. So, for example, if we go back to our example of evolution, we know that over time it has been supported again and again that changes in the genes of organisms have occurred over time, and that there is relationships among organisms. There's sort of a common ancestor, and different types of organisms spring off of that common ancestor depending on pressures from their habitat, from competition, etc. It has to be supported by multiple strands of evidence rather than just a single foundation. So I can't just come up with a theory based on one piece of evidence. There has to be many, many different things supporting it. In our example of evolution, we have morphological or body structure similarities. We have genetics, which is a huge one. We have fossil evidence and various other strands of evidence. So all of these different um, pieces of science have joined together to support the theory of evolution. A theory is generally only taken seriously if it allows for changes to be made. So, for those of you who like a heavier reading, Thomas Kuhn wrote The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And in that book, he talks about scientific revolution or how science changes over time. So, as we uncover new bits of information, as our technology improves and we can actually detect more about the universe around us, we may need to alter theories in order to, or parts of theories, or sort of the way that a theory is explained. Some changes have to be made over time rather than claiming absolute certainty. In science, nothing is absolute because there's so much we don't know about the universe. And finally, Occam's razor. Theories have to pass the Occam's razor test, and Occam's razor states that the simplest explanation is probably correct. So when you make a whole bunch of presumptions about a lot of conditions that must have happened in order to explain something, you kind of dilute the explanation itself. If there's a simple, straightforward explanation, that's probably the one that we're going to go for. So those are our conditions for our scientific theory. Finally, science is limited to what can truly be supported. So when we're talking about what is scientific and what is science, we can't answer questions like what is the meaning of life, because meaning is something that cannot be scientifically demonstrated. Meaning is a human construct. So humans have decided what has meaning. So for example, if I look at a piece of art and I say that it's beautiful, that's sort of a subjective thing. What makes that piece of art beautiful? Has it been beautiful across the ages, since it's been, will it be beautiful in the future? Beautiful is a concept that is a very subjective thing. We know that there are some evolutionary aspects that have people look at certain things and prefer them over others, but we also know that there is a lot of societal influence on things like that. And in terms of the meaning of life, there's a lot of different reasons that a lot of different explanations for why humans are on the planet, and that's just simply not something that science could ever answer. We have human error, so this can lead to misinterpretation of facts. So science has to be very careful to look at all the sources of error, such as bias or in statistics. There's a lot of error that has to be taken into consideration. What is the actual influence of that error? No, I shouldn't use the word meaningful. I just said it's not really important. How influential is that error on that particular outcome? Evidence may take time to accept. So science is kind of limited to societal pressures, honestly. Whenever something new is suggested, even the scientific community, they will look at new scientific findings or new proposals of explanations and question them based on what's already known. That's just sort of human nature, but it's also a good thing. We don't want to just accept an explanation that someone comes up with without ample evidence. And even in the face of evidence, society itself can sometimes push back, as we see with arguments around vaccines, for example. Some things are just too subjective for science, and I kind of talked about that in terms of deciding what is beautiful, or what is an ethical or moral consideration. Those are all things that we have standards, and some of those standards are based in some biological phenomena, but for the most part, there's just too much human influence and cultural, honestly, difference to be able to make those decisions. So science is limited to what can actually be demonstrated scientifically and experimentally and determined to be um, able to be explained by things that can be scientifically measured.